What started as a few tariffs quickly spiraled into one of the biggest economic face-offs of our time. The US and China, two of the world's largest economies, went from strategic trade partners to fierce economic rivals locked in a tit-for-tat tariff war. But what triggered this dramatic shift? How did a seemingly simple policy decision ignite a global showdown? And where does this high-stakes rivalry stand today? In this video, we'll unpack the full timeline of the US-China trade war, from its explosive beginning to the tensions still reshaping global markets and geopolitical alliances in 2024. In early 2018, the Trump administration launched an economic offensive against China, accusing it of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, and a ballooning trade deficit. The first salvo? Tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese imports, targeting machinery, electronics, and tech components crucial to US industries. China wasted no time firing back with retaliatory tariffs on American soybeans, cars, and other goods, delivering a direct hit to the US agricultural heartland. The world watched anxiously as two economic giants squared off. Investors panicked, stock markets wobbled, companies on both sides of the Pacific braced for uncertainty. For years, the US had tolerated China's rise as a manufacturing powerhouse. But 2018 marked a breaking point. Washington was no longer willing to play by Beijing's rules. These tariffs were more than just policy tools. They were warning shots in an emerging economic rivalry. Behind closed doors, trade negotiations faltered. Both governments dug in. And for the first time in decades, the idea of decoupling the world's two biggest economies seemed dangerously plausible. This wasn't just a trade dispute, it was the opening act of a much larger geopolitical drama about dominance, innovation, and control of the 21st century economy. By 2019, the trade war had become a full-blown tit-for-tat slugfest. The US raised tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, covering everything from electronics to clothing. China retaliated in kind, targeting American agriculture, energy, and manufacturing. Each announcement from either side triggered market shocks and global uncertainty. The damage wasn't just political, it was deeply economic. US companies began moving supply chains out of China. Chinese exporters scrambled to find new markets. Consumers faced higher prices on everyday items, and uncertainty loomed over multinational investments. The world economy began to feel the ripple effects of what now looked like a prolonged economic Cold War. Then came the so-called Phase 1 deal in January 2020. It aimed to pause the conflict. China promised to buy more American goods, and the US agreed to roll back some tariffs. But even as both sides smiled for the cameras, skepticism ran deep. Critics called it a band-aid on a bullet wound, a temporary truce that left most issues unresolved. This wasn't resolution, it was a pause. And just as the world was catching its breath, a new crisis emerged, one that would change everything. COVID-19. When COVID-19 erupted in early 2020, it didn't just halt economies, it completely rewired the global trade narrative. Factories shut down, ports closed, demand evaporated, and supply chains snapped. But beyond the economic chaos, the pandemic quickly turned into a political flashpoint between the US and China. Accusations flew. American leaders blamed China for covering up the virus's early spread, fueling a wave of anti-China rhetoric. Terms like China virus entered political discourse, and trust between the two superpowers sank to new lows. In Washington, the focus shifted from economic cooperation to national security and resilience. Companies took notice. Businesses that once relied heavily on Chinese manufacturing began looking elsewhere. Vietnam, India, Mexico, triggering the beginning of a global supply chain rethink. The phrase decoupling stopped being theoretical. It became a strategy. For Beijing, the crisis was an opportunity to showcase its state-controlled efficiency and push its own version of economic leadership. For the US, it was a wake-up call, a glaring sign of vulnerability. The trade war was no longer about tariffs. It had morphed into something deeper, a battle over trust, reliability, and control in an uncertain world. As the dust of the pandemic settled, A new front opened in the US-China conflict: technology. By 2021, it was no longer just about tariffs or supply chains. The battlefield had shifted to semiconductors, 5G, AI, and digital platforms. The US imposed strict bans on Chinese tech giants like Huawei and ZTE, citing national security threats. It moved to block TikTok, restricted Chinese access to advanced semiconductors, and tightened controls on exports of critical chip-making equipment. Washington made it clear, protecting America's tech edge was now a top priority. China fired back with its own ambitions. Beijing doubled down on its Made in China 2025 strategy, investing heavily in semiconductor production, AI research, and cutting-edge tech independence. It viewed the tech war not as an obstacle, but as a call to innovate domestically. The rivalry intensified. Tech was no longer just about market share. It was about military power, surveillance capabilities, and global influence. Economic policy became a tool of security strategy, and global tech supply chains became geopolitical chess pieces. By 2024, the US-China conflict had fully transcended economics. It had become a defining struggle of the 21st century. Who will lead the future of technology, and under what rules? From tariffs to tech bans, the US-China trade war has evolved into a broader battle over influence, innovation, and ideology. What started in 2018 as a dispute over trade imbalances has morphed into a multi-dimensional standoff that's reshaping the global economy. Despite deals and diplomatic meetings, the core issues remain unresolved. Supply chains have shifted, trust has eroded, and the race for technological dominance continues to accelerate. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment.